And this is actually the 20th year of me presenting at NAB, so there's a little bit of symmetry there. To get started with this motion graphics release, how many here have ever seen or used a tool in After Effects called the Puppet tool? The Puppet tool was introduced in After Effects CS3, and it really gave people a lot of creative control as far as moving and manipulating two-dimensional images. And in fact, it was so well received, the Photoshop team added the Puppet tool into Photoshop. The Illustrator team added Puppet tool into Illustrator. And as these different applications started using the Puppet technology, we started to see it get more and more advanced. Adobe Character Animator came out last year, and Character Animator had an even more advanced form of how you could kind of manipulate your two-dimensional graphics. So we thought it was time to kind of take all of those improvements and enhancements and bring them back over into After Effects. So we're super excited to now have an advanced Puppet tool inside of After Effects. Now I'm going to start off by using the old school version here. You can see as I've clicked on and added a pin to this flag, it's currently showing the engine is using the advanced engine. The legacy engine is in there as well. And to get started, I wanted to kind of show you what the original effect looked like. So this is using the older mesh that was created. I've just dropped a single pin on here. You see it's created some polygons. If I click and add an additional point, it's not very dense at this point, and it doesn't really react to additional points and make more triangles in the mesh. So from the deformation perspective, this is still fairly limited. Let's go ahead and use the Puppet tool on the other flag. I'll just go ahead and add a point there. Right away, you can see that the deformation mesh is much more dense. And as I start to add additional points, this really goes through and it reacts to that and gives me much more fine-tuned control than ever before. So the new engine gives me these wonderful refinements in how I can deform and I can animate my two-dimensional graphics. Now I'm going to switch to a different comp. Here's one where, let me just twirl these down. I've got a couple of different meshes here for these different deformations. I'm going to go ahead and use this second version here. Let me go ahead and select a point on this. Inside the Puppet tool, as I'm starting to deform and warp and shape different objects here, each of these different flags reacts differently depending on which type of animation I'm doing. The old-fashioned way this would animate doesn't really look very flag-like, but using the new controls found in the advanced options, I can actually start to see much more deformation options to be able to actually manipulate this and work with this. There's an item found inside the comp now that's called Mesh Rotation Refinement. And if I scroll down here, inside of Mesh Rotation, I can find the refinement settings and actually dial this in to the way I want to animate this, and this will actually start to animate much more like a flag. So now as I'm moving this down and up, you can see how this is actually stretching and distorting, way different from the way the old tool used to work. So again, much more natural style flag motion than what we used to see in the old Puppet tool. Now the last part of this, if I'm working with this advanced flag and I start to play around with the animation of this, we've got a logo in the center of this flag, and as I'm just animating this by hand, I'll go ahead and turn off the mesh so that you don't need to see that right now. You can see that the logo is actually stretching and distorting along with the flag. Well, of course, the client may not like that. They want to see that logo a little bit less deformed. Using the Puppet Starch tool, I can drop in specific pins for actually keeping the flag, keeping that particular part of the logo from distorting as much as it did before. And the tools for actually changing the starch controls allow me to add additional starch pins so that I can define this particular area here and say I want to kind of keep that from distorting as much, and it will keep that shape much, much cleaner. So we're really excited about having a new Puppet tool inside of After Effects. It's possible to do all different types of animated tools where we can actually go through and animate flags, animate characters, animate shapes, and we're just really excited about having a brand new Puppet tool inside of After Effects. Now the next thing I want to jump into is dealing with data-driven graphics. So we introduced last year the concept of being able to animate based on a data file, and we see this more and more. If you've ever been to a website that handles the weather, you'll see usually some really nice animations. Oftentimes the data going into those animations is driven by something called a JSON file, JSON. It's a common format for dealing with data. We introduced the idea that you could actually bring in a JSON file into After Effects in the release last fall. This new release, we're making it even easier to deal with data-driven graphics. Now, why is this a big deal? Anytime you're working with graphic elements that have to be updated very, very quickly, election results, you're trying to animate based on a data set of, cars moving at different speeds. Oftentimes we look at a spreadsheet, we have to manually enter those values into a chart or a graph. Wouldn't it be great to just be able to take that data directly into After Effects? Here I have a CSV file. I'm just going to go ahead and reveal this in the Finder. We'll go ahead and open this in Excel just so you can take a look at it. Sign in to activate Office. Okay, maybe we won't look at it in Excel. You'll have to trust me that this is, there's just a quick and easy way of looking at this. You can see the data within this particular Excel. It's a standard CSV file. We also support TSV files, which are text files, tab delimited files. So you can see all the various columns, all the different data. Watch what happens when I just take this CSV file and drag it into a comp. Oops. Drag, drop. I can now twirl this down and actually get access to each of the different columns, each of the different data values directly inside of my composition. And in fact, if I want to, I can take something like this date value and just drag it and drop it up here and actually see that display within this composition. Now, even better, I'll go ahead and twirl this one up, and I'm just going to create a quick text layer here. I can format a piece of text just using some dummy text, and utilizing the Pick Whip tool, it's possible for me to tie this into any particular value. So if I use the day value here, and I want to tie this to the to day 4, I can literally take the Pick Whip and tie it directly to a value, or go the other direction, tie the value to a particular layer. And let me twirl down my source text property so I can do this correctly. Drag, drop, there we go. What am I doing wrong? All right, let me clear what I'm working on. Try that one more time. Little operator error on my part. Let's try day 1. Drag, drop. No. Well, it worked before. The idea behind this is this gives me the ability to actually inherit the properties. I can write expressions without writing expressions simply by using the pick whip to connect these different values together. It will allow me to actually line and attach these different values without having to write any expressions. All right, I must be doing something wrong. You're going to have to trust me on this. I'm going to jump to a little bit better example here. This is an example of using all of these different text, the data values from the CSV file. We've created an animated graphic here. So we've tied various levels together. The tied levels, as they change from day to day, those are coming from that CSV file. Where the power of this comes from, this gives me the ability to just change out the data and have the animation automatically update on its own. So in this situation, what I'm going to do, I have a different data file that we're going to work with. We're using the Monterey Bay tide chart right now. I want to replace it with the chart from Kona in Hawaii. All I have to do is drag this, and I'm going to use the Option key or the Alt key on my keyboard to actually replace this. So I'm going to go ahead and start dragging this. Let me make sure I have that selected. Title data, drag, replace. And you can see that now suddenly the animation is changed. This is now using the data from the other graph inside of this. So anytime you're dealing with common data sets, let's say you need to make a series of lower third graphics with the same names on a regular basis, or someone brings in a CSV file with all the various graphics, you can actually link and tie those together. So just by replacing the CSV file, your graphics will update automatically. So pretty exciting using data-driven workflows. We support CSV, TSV. We also support JSON, and there's a new format called MG-JSON that you can find out more about either at the After Effects pod or online in the help document. It's a motion graphic JSON format, kind of specific to After Effects. It's a little bit of an extension to the JSON standard so that it works better in motion graphics workflows. Okay, next thing that I want to show you here, I've been kind of saving this because this is something that's really going to change how you do compositions, how you nest, how many different nested comps you have to work with. So I've got a little background that we've been kind of stylizing here. I've done some color correction on this. I've also added in a special some grain on top of this. The grain in this is actually GPU accelerated in this new version. So if you've tried to use effects like add grain in the past, it's now 7 times faster, roughly 7 times faster, because we're using the GPU to accelerate things like grain. In the fall release, we added things like motion blur as a GPU accelerated effect. So more and more performant inside of After Effects using the new engine that leverages the GPU more than before. Now, on top of this background, I'm going to create a title sequence. And so what I'm going to do, I've got a couple of different titles that I'm working with. Here's a nice title design that I've done. I've just put in some placeholder graphics, placeholder text in this. I'll go ahead and play that one more time so that you can see it. Now, we introduced in a previous version of After Effects a new panel, and I'm going to go ahead and open up that panel. It's called the Essential Graphics panel. And the idea behind the Essential Graphics panel, this provides a quick and easy place for me to take properties from within my composition and simply drag them and drop them into the Essential Graphics panel. So this gives me an ability to do things like, if I want to be able to quickly change the source text, I don't want to see this with first name, last name, I want to see it with Carl Soule. Rather than having to dig through the comp to make that change, I can just come up here and type this in to the Essential Graphics panel. And now I can see what this is going to look like with that particular text applied to it. So anytime you've ever been given a comp from somebody else and they say, oh yeah, just make that change on layer 27, you'll be fine. Now you actually have a way of kind of giving somebody a little bit of a head start into diving into the compositions using the Essential Graphics panel. It becomes that easy place where you can test out expressions, test out your animations. Works really, really well. Now we support a number of new properties to this, including rotation, including position, scale. There's a lot of different properties that are now supported inside of this Essential Graphics panel. I'll show you another composition. This is more like a main title. We've got eyedroppers with color. We've got scale, X position, Y position. We've got rotational controls. Now, I'm building out a credit sequence. So I've got that wonderful background, and I've got a couple of instances of this same composition showing up in multiple places here. Now, if I change it using the Essential Graphics panel, I'll just go back to this master graphic here. You see, I changed it here. If I go back to first name, last name, and I got a little extra K in there. There we go. Oops. Now the issue that I'm having here is each of these different versions are linked to the same nest. Now you guys know how you would typically fix this. If I wanted to go in and make a change and have two different versions of this, normally I would have to take that composition, I'd have to duplicate it, make a second instance of that. Then I could go in and I could make changes inside the text for that second version. And then if I want to add another one, I have to make another duplicate and then more duplicates. And pretty soon we've got just tons and tons of nests, and it becomes difficult to kind of see where we're going with this. You want to see how we fix this? This is really cool. You guys are going to like this. Now, whatever properties I drag and drop into the Essential Graphics panel, we're basically telling After Effects that these are master properties. And as a master properties, when I nest this composition, if I twirl this down, we now have master properties for each instance of this nest. So I can twirl down the master properties for this instance. I can twirl down the master properties for this instance. So I can now start to modify and change these properties without ever leaving this composition. I don't have to duplicate that composition. I can use it in 100 places and it's all still linked to that one master composition. But I'm promoting these properties as master properties. So as a quick example of this, if I change the first edge color here to kind of a green, now you can see that wipe on is doing kind of a green color. If I go to the second instance of this, you can see I have a separate color picker for that. I can make this one more of a red color. I could go back to the original comp that we were working in and maybe promote another property here. So maybe if I wanted to add, you know, something like rotation or positioning of that line, I could actually take these properties. It's just as simple as dragging and dropping into the Essential Graphics panel. And when I do that, when I come back to the main property, you can see that that is now promoted as a new master property. So we can do this to any property. If you want to see the different properties that you can do this on, if I just go back to my nest, I'll click on something called Solo Supported Properties up at the top here. So many, many, many new properties that we didn't have before. Things like rotation. I'll go ahead and drop that in. There's a hairline. We have the position, anchor point, range selectors for text, blur properties. All of these can be added as master properties. So if you played around a little bit with the Essential Graphics panel in the last version of After Effects, just know that there are many, many more properties available inside of this release of After Effects. All right, now the last use of the Essential Graphics panel. You've already seen two uses of this as a quick shortcut for commonly changed properties within a comp, using this to promote a property from a nest as a master property so that it shows up in all the comps that it's been nested into. The last thing that this can be used for is exporting this particular comp into a special format called a motion graphic template. Now, how many here have used motion graphic templates before? Awesome. So there's a lot of new features in this release dealing with motion graphic templates. First off, just being able to promote more properties into the Essential Graphics panel makes Mogerts much easier to create. It gives you more flexibility on the control that you might want to hand off to an editor. If you haven't used motion graphic templates before, the idea behind this is I can kind of wrap this entire composition up into a standalone file, and I can put this in a library and give it to a Premiere Pro editor, and they can just drag it and drop it into the timeline in Premiere. Any master properties that I've put in here will show up in Premiere, and the editor can actually make changes to those over in Premiere Pro. So the idea behind this, if I choose to export this out, go ahead and save this. I can push this into either a library, I can push it to my local templates folder. You can see here I have a lot of different libraries in my Creative Cloud account. Some of these are for collaborating with people around the world. Chetan and Carl. Chetan is my coworker that lives in Mumbai, so I can actually push this over to him. And this will also warn me if, this will automatically use, if I'm using Typekit fonts, and the Premiere Pro editor has not synced up the particular fonts that I'm using in my motion graphic template, they'll get a message basically saying, hey, this doesn't have the font, but the font's up in Typekit. You want me to just go sync it for you? So they don't have to go through an install process. It's literally just click OK, wait for the font to sync, and it'll show up. Now I'm going to switch over to Premiere for just a second. Working inside of Premiere, Premiere has something called the Essential Graphics panel inside of Premiere. And if I click on one of these motion graphic templates that I've already put on the timeline, you can see here's an example of one. It's been customized somewhat. That line is kind of coming across at a different angle, kind of matching the shoreline. I have the controls in Premiere that were given to me by the motion graphics person. I don't have any more control. I can't go in and change the fonts. I can't go in and, with the exception of this edge color, I don't have control of changing colors, but I can customize this in a lot of different ways. So as an example, if I wanted to change this, the edge wipe, you can see I've got a nice rotational control where I can go in and make a change to that. If I want to change that edge wipe color, I can click on this, give it a different color. We even have a new comparison view that I can use so that if I'm looking at this and now I want to kind of compare this to a different version, I can see these side by side within Premiere. So I'm now comparing what I had to what I'm now changing it to. Maybe instead of red, red's a little bit overblown. How about a nice blue? Ooh. How about a color pick to the color of the water here? Ah, okay. So you can see, again, simple controls, very easy for me to change text. And if I'm working with a motion graphics person, if they make updates or they make additional variations of this, I can actually set up my Essential Graphics panel. Maybe I have a different font that I want to try. I can just drag And if I option drag this onto one of the versions here, it will ask me, do you want to replace all the other instances? I can click yes. Let me take us out of comparison view. And you can see this is now using a completely different font. This is more of a cinematic font. I kind of like the other font for social media. This would look really nice in maybe a theater, you know, something a little bit more stylized. Now, the last thing that I really want to end on is the whole concept of these motion graphic templates. How many here have ever gotten pretty far with a client with like 5 or 6 different designs? They end up fixing on one design, and then you have all these extra designs that you're kind of like, well, what do I do with these? Adobe is now putting motion graphic templates inside of Adobe stock. So if you are a motion graphics artist, if you have motion graphics that you've created inside of After Effects, and you are would like to make some money off of those, think about becoming an Adobe stock motion graphic template contributor. If you're interested in more information about this, you can go to a website. You can talk to the people around the back. They've got a special URL that you can click on. It'll kind of explain what it takes to become a motion graphics template contributor for Adobe stock. And they have a pod right around the back of the booth. And with that, I am out of time. Thank you guys so much. Please stay tuned. We've got a great presenter coming up next.